If you're new here, you won't have heard me gush about the Anycubic Photon M3 Premium before. That was my 4th ever printer review, but long-time viewers know I've loved it for a long time. Even the thumbnail back then just read, "Buy this printer." It wasn't clickbait, no hyperbole, no drama, just me being aggressively confident. Those who bought it sing its praises to this day as being one of the last great printers available. But in truth, it simply didn't sell well, at least not enough for Anycubic to keep it alive for more than 6 months, and the spare parts disappeared soon after. That unfortunate flop pushed the brand into a bit of a spiral, one where they wrongly assumed people just want cheaper machines, and that's how we ended up with the relatively awful M5 line. Now the M7s were better, but also weird, some solid ideas mixed with some choices that still make my eye twitch. So when I say the P1 is a solid, thoughtful equipped entry into the 10-inch category, I'm not hyping it up. I'm acknowledging that it's more capable than most people expect from the brand. It deserves your attention, even if just to see where they've landed. Because of course, this is still Anycubic, so they've sprinkled just enough chaos into this design to remind you exactly who you're dealing with. Whether those choices actually impact you practically or psychologically, or whether this is still a better deal than the compromises forced on you by other brands, well, that's for you to decide after you watch this. Hi, I'm Ross, and this is Fohammer Videos. Let's get into it. Okay, first up, this dual build plate thing, ignore it. Anycubic have plastered it across every piece of promo they've shown, but it's an optional add-on, not the default machine. We'll get into what it's good for later, just know it's not how the printer ships. And I think it's a stupid marketing choice, because yes, it grabs attention, but it also confuses people right up front by making the printer look like some ridiculous contraption before you've ever had a chance to see what it actually does. I'm quite confident that more people will bounce after seeing this than be impressed by it. But anyway, now we know what it isn't, let's talk about what it is. At its core, it's a standard 10-inch resin printer. A normal build plate, a normal vat, and then a collection of weird, sometimes clever, sometimes questionable engineering decisions stacked around it. Unboxing here is business as usual for Anycubic. There's no premium experience, just a brown cardboard box with the printer gently sandwiched in some foam. Tilt the box, slide it out, peel the wrapping, and remove the accessories embedded in the top layer. Basic, but it works. The printer is pretty light considering the supposed quality they've advertised is inside, but visually it's fantastic. It feels like the next step in Anycubic's professional aesthetic phase. Clean, plain, borderline medical. It doesn't scream at you like a gaming PC, it just sits there, looking competent. The lid is an up and over design, this time with an integrated handle. Just be aware that when you lift it, it extends beyond the machine's footprint that you'll see advertised online, so you'll need roughly 65 centimeters of height and 53 centimeters of depth for full clearance. Or you can just remove the screws on the side and use this as a removable faceplate, which is actually ideal for farms. Now, the first problem. I actually normally don't bother testing UV leakage from these covers because historically most brands have been good enough. But after my first print, I noticed some cured resin on top of my build plate, which shouldn't happen. So I grabbed a UV meter and a UV torch, and yeah, UV light gets through the lid. It's not a ton, but it's clearly enough to cure the resin that's in my machine. Now to be fair, my workshop isn't exactly a dim, cozy side room, the same sort of place most people keep their printers at home. I've got daylight fatigue reducing LED strips and big studio lighting. So my environment is certainly harsher than normal, but still, this has never happened to me before. And when I raised it with Anycubic, they basically said this is the lid they're shipping with it and suggested using it in dimmer rooms, which I've got to be honest is a hilarious solution to a hardware design flaw, if nothing else. And it's a good job they aren't positioning this as a professional machine for controlled environments like dental studios then, because they're not going to use daylight lamps or whatever lamps have UV in them to prevent fatigue. Anyway, since we're on the lid, the sealing is also creative. They've added felt-like strips on the top of the body, but they seem more like soft close dampeners than actual seals, because the rest of the edges and the entire top perimeter have noticeable gaps where VOCs will escape, but also fresh air can pour in. I'll come back to that in a minute. Now, ports wise, the power socket is on the back, but there's no rocker switch. There's also a rubber bung on the back covering a vent hole, and now we know what it's for. It's a proprietary connector for Anycubic's Air Pure 2.0, which essentially is a hose with an inline fan that vents fumes outside your home. And I've got to be honest, this looks like a solid add-on. Finally, someone is doing this properly with an official product, and they even offer printable connectors for old machines or third-party units too. Also on the back, like the M7, you can access some of the internal controller boards, which should help maintenance a bit. The USB port, however, is on the front just above the power button on the side of the offset screen, and realistically most people won't use it much because the printer has built-in Wi-Fi, which allows for remote sending, starting and monitoring of prints from both the slicer and the phone app, and that is incredibly handy. But sadly, there's no Ethernet socket available, something more common in professional devices. So it's a good job they're not pushing this towards professional users. Anyway, jumping inside, first up is the build plate. This is now a solid, high-grade stainless steel platform, much tougher than usual aluminium plates because it'll resist scratches far better. The downside is the completely flat top rather than a taper, which means manual cleaning after every print. If you don't wipe it before removing the plate, resin is gonna run everywhere. Now, just quickly jumping down to the vat, this has two small prongs at the front which let you mount this plate sideways so resin can run off. Now this helps, but I'd prefer this to be on the side of the vat because the current position limits the height of models you print to the depth of the screen, and you also do still get runs down the handle, and you can't close the lid with this in place. It's definitely useful, but it's imperfect. Also, this steel plate has 4 recessed screw holes, which means it isn't perfectly smooth, and these recesses will leave dents in parts of your bottom layers. Again, not ideal if you're printing direct from the plate, as professionals, engineers, and dental users sometimes do. So again, it's a good job this isn't being targeted at them. There are also 2 other plates which I got to see firsthand at Form Next. One is another steel plate which has relief holes to reduce early layer suction, and the other is the dual vat aluminium plate. And let's just say it, for most hobbyists and most users of this machine, this dual plate looks ridiculous, but there are some real use cases. Some, like dentistry, where printing 2 materials with different exposure settings at the same time would actually matter. I can also see it being useful with expensive resins, like casting resins. Putting a small amount into one side and only printing what you need, rather than filling a whole vat, certainly has its upsides. So yes, it's niche, it's kind of industrial, and it has genuine use cases, which makes it amusing that other design choices don't fully support those users or their environments. But all the plates do attach with a compression latch, which is very handy and should honestly be standard by now. Now, when it comes to the mechanism, we have dual linear rails and what Anycubic are calling an industrial grade ball screw. Now that sounds very professional, but it's a C7 grade, not a C5. C7 is more commonly used on hobbyist machines rather than on proper industrial equipment. It's still good, it's just not as good as the wording would lead you to believe. Will it impact the average user? Probably not, but this is the kind of choice that makes the machine look prosumer and professional from the outside, rather than being genuinely professional grade hardware on the inside. And this is one of the things that keeps the cost down. Now, moving on to the vat, it's metal, which is good, and they finally ditched ACF release film in favour of clear PFA. So for all my haters out there who argued I was wrong about frosty release film reducing print quality, please explain why Anycubic have now ditched it here. Yeah? Alright, you also get the aforementioned clip so you can mount the plate sideways for runoff, and a very good pour spout. This alone could be a solid reason to get this printer. But one very odd thing, or dangerous thing, which I hope is just in my early model, is the max fill line. Now, the specs of the machine say that it holds up to 1 litre of resin, but even with a full bottle of Frozen Hyperfine in mine, my resin level was still well below that line. I could have easily poured in another bottle, and probably more, before actually reaching it. Now, the problem here is if you filter that line, the resin will most definitely and almost immediately spill out of the spout as soon as the plate enters the vat. So either that needs fixing, or you need to know not to fill it that high. So it's a good job you're watching my videos. Please subscribe for more tips on how to avoid screw-ups by avoiding the manufacturer's defects. The best feature of this vat by far is the built-in resin heater, which includes temperature sensing rather than just a simple on-off that other brands deliver. Now this is great for colder environments or just getting your resin to a consistent and ideal temperature during prints, and it can be set as high as 40 degrees too, which is going to be incredibly handy for those really dense resins, more engineering stuff. So that's something. And not only does this affix with latches, but when you mount this to the machine, you get a really satisfying click, which, yeah, is something I'm still weirdly fixated on and was since my Form Next preview. But this is something that does feel premium. So overall, this is a good, feature-rich, large vat with a couple of questionable markings. Now, onto the screen, and it's number time, because this is where a lot of people get hung up on the stats. The P1 uses a 14K panel, 10.1 inch with a resolution of 13,312 by 5,120 pixels across an area of 223 by 126 millimeters. That gives us 16.8 micron pixels on the x-axis and 24.8 micron pixels on the y, or technically 17 by 25, because who the hell is working in fractions of microns other than Anycubic to make it look slightly better in their write-up. And while we're talking about size, the build height is 230mm, so it sits comfortably at the slightly larger end of the current 10-inch category. Now, this resolution. In practice, most resins can only render at around 25 to 30 microns in ideal conditions anyway, so the screen is already outperforming what the materials can physically reproduce. So I want to say that before anyone jumps on the why is this not 16K or higher bandwagon. And, well, not only that, but the 16K screens used in a lot of current machines are physically smaller and require more UV power and heat to push light through the tighter pixel grid. That means they tend to run hotter and burn out faster. So yes, 16K is a bigger number, but in this context, it doesn't automatically make things better. Trust me, this 14K panel was the better choice. However, the bigger and possibly more obvious question is, does this corrugated layer they've added to reduce peel forces affect print quality? Well, if you've been watching my videos, you already know the answer. Yes, of course it does. And if you need external validation, go and watch J3D's video on screen protectors. Even clear flat glass protectors soften detail a bit, so you shouldn't be surprised that there's more distortion from a wavy bonded surface that scatters light in various directions. And to back that up, when you compare prints on this to the same 14K panel on Anycubic's own M7 printer, of course once you've swapped its default ACF for PFA, the P1 is softer. Not dramatically, but visibly. And here, you can't remove it and get the sharpness back. Unlike ACF, this is a built-in hardware bottleneck. Now, Anycubic have obviously been obsessed with reducing peel forces without copying the mechanics that other brands use. First with ACF, and now with this. And yes, it does reduce peel forces, slightly, but the price is a small loss of surface quality every time they chase this goal. Now, I'm saying that I am splitting hairs. Does it matter in practice? For most people, probably not. Most users are probably printing pre-supported miniatures with anti-aliasing and using softer, tougher resins, not the more brittle, high-detail stuff I use for screen testing. In real-world prints, you'll struggle to see a meaningful difference. In terms of print success or speed, the benefit is marginal. Reduced peel force does help during the first few millimeters of a lift in terms of speed, but most of the speed advantage in this machine probably comes from the dynamic pressure sensing algorithm, which I'll talk about in a minute. The other theoretical benefit I was shown at Form Next is the idea of fewer supports are needed because of reduced peel forces, but Anycubic Slicer doesn't implement this. The auto support tool gives you the same density if you're printing on this as if you were printing on the original Anycubic Photon. So unless you're manually supporting and iterating your own model's supports, you're unlikely to see that benefit either. So maybe, but it's only a maybe, you will slightly reduce the fails you could get from models tearing from the plate, assuming we can trust Anycubic's dynamic force sensors and reaction to that. But the truth remains, the P1 trades a small amount of sharpness for a small reduction in peel force. And here, unlike with ACF, you can't swap it out. This is a fixed design choice, and this time you're stuck with it. It makes me wish for a version of this printer without this, because I can all but guarantee if somebody figures out how to safely remove this wavy cover, you'll get sharper prints. If we can give this some praise though, Anycubic have finally given us a much better screen replacement process rather than take the whole base apart like with previous machines. Here you just remove the surrounding tape and undo 8 screws, and that lets you lift out the screen and unclamp the ribbon cable. Fantastic. I genuinely have half a mind to check if a normal M7 screen will work in this, but I don't currently have one to hand, so maybe that's a future video. Right. Leveling. So despite the product manager of this machine telling me at Formnext that this doesn't have auto leveling but assisted leveling, the marketing team still calls it auto leveling. And honestly, I've got more of an issue with the term than the implementation. To be clear, this is not auto leveling. The plate doesn't magically set itself. What actually happens is the plate presses down on the screen and there are force sensors in each corner that measure how much pressure is applied. You then turn the 4 screws on the top of the build plate until the readings match, meaning it's parallel to the screen. So it's assisted leveling at best, you still have to do it. But Anycubic does say they'll calibrate the machines at the factory, and that there is the real value, giving you the impression that it's doing it automatically. And if you do ever need to re-level yourself, at least it's in a measured way. But the bigger issue I have with this is a spring-mounted screen, because any pressure on that screen during printing from the plate or the resin beneath it will push the screen downwards. The 0 point isn't mechanically fixed. Unlike systems from other brands that actually lock the screen in place, this one stays somewhat fluid. And that can lead to some early layer compression, sometimes visible as a line across prints, or even tearing if the model volume changes and pressure drops. However, Anycubic has been leaning heavily into dynamic pressure sensing for years, more than most other consumer brands. So much of this behaviour is compensated for in the software, in their algorithms. The printer detects when movement stops, manages lift heights, and even detects when a layer has fully peeled from the release film before moving on. And in my testing so far, the results have been mostly flawless, with a couple of prints that have shown this compression line partway up. But most of the errors have been caused by me having to go back to performing manual exposure tuning on this printer, something I haven't had to do in a while. So it's a bit of a weird system. Good, bad, good. You are relying on Anycubic's pressure sensing to make potential issues disappear, and this seems to do a passable job in most scenarios. I mostly print pre-supported models anyway, so those lines are normally part of the support structure, and I never actually see it on the models themselves that I'm printing, but I know this is going to bother some people, like those looking at this for engineering use. So yeah, you're beholden to Anycubic's algorithms, but if you don't like it, you can turn most of this off and go back to basics, setting your lift heights and retract speeds and all that manually, albeit with a springy screen underneath. And finally, on main hardware, the light source. It's a 405nm chip on board array, which is pretty standard for consumer resin printers. It's reliable, it works, and it's a sensible choice for this price. Again, it's just not the kind of thing you'd normally find in actual professional machines, which is typically more 385nm. But again, thankfully Anycubic aren't pretending this is for pro users. When it comes to ancillary features though, there's also the built-in camera, which is only 480p, but it's sufficient for remote monitoring through the Anycubic phone app, and it'll generate some passable time lapses. It's not going to win cinematography awards, but it works. On the software side, the UI has had a noticeable upgrade. The layout is similar to previous generations, but you've got more control on screen and more information available without digging through menus. It's still clean and it genuinely feels more mature than earlier versions. One thing missing though is the ability to set up multiple exposure tests directly in the UI like on other brands. But this is still much better than it was before, because now you can easily set up tests using the built-in model or your own. The starting exposure exposure time is set in the resin profile, and then you define the increments using this tool. And the test actually prints with numbers physically printed next to each sample so you can see which is which. Just be aware that it will shrink larger models that you import. And speaking of the slicer, this itself has come a long way. Resin profiles are now neatly nested by brand, and you can create multiple plates with auto layout options that actually work. For the dual build plates, you can select each side independently and then assign different resin curing profiles, but the layer heights need to match for hopefully obvious reasons. And speaking of that dual plate function, I said I wanted to cover it. For those who want the specification, each of the two zones on either side of the screen have a volume of 66 by 126 by 195 millimeters XYZ, and the y-axis obviously matches the full screen depth. And while Anycubic hasn't provided me with the exact resolution of these zones, doing a bit of math, it works out to approximately 3,940 pixels wide by the same 5,120 pixels deep. And yes, the printer even has a built-in vac cleaning function for each of these zones independently. Anyway, back to the slicer. The thing that now feels daft is the new placement of basic movement controls behind nested menus. There's plenty of space to put them permanently on the screen in the same way that Orca Slicer does it. That would be much handier. But overall, I do think this is a very competent program that does keep improving, and I usually prefer sticking with the manufacturer's slicers anyway, just to avoid more compatibility nonsense. And finally, because I know someone will ask, yes, the printer does have a power loss resume feature, but a lot of people still message me about backup batteries or UPS units for 3D printers in case of a power cut. Now, A4E, which I think is how it's pronounced, actually sent me one of theirs to test it out, and I've been using it just fine. It's solid, it's got loads of outputs, and it's portable enough to take camping if you ever want to charge gear off-grid. And I even learned this week that it's got expandable power storage, which is pretty neat. So if you want a decent UPS to pair with a resin printer, I'll drop an affiliate link to it somewhere in the description. But here we are with the printer. Where does that leave us? The P1 is a very capable machine with smart upgrades, sensible workflow improvements, smart features like adding a camera, and a genuinely better user experience than anything Anycubic has put out in years. But it's still not the second coming of the M3 Premium, and it's not the prosumer resolution that the marketing implies. It's very much a consumer machine that's wearing prosumer clothing. It's got the look, the features, and the ambition, but it's built from the cheapest viable versions of those parts to hit a price point. And because of that, it falls short of being the premium, uncompromising successor some of us were hoping for. Let's be honest, this is just the successor to the M7, not a prosumer beast. But here's the thing, if you want a reliable, modern, well-featured 10-inch resin printer, you don't obsess over microscopic differences in sharpness, and you're not expecting it to replace an $800 to $1,000+ real prosumer unit, then this is a pretty great option. If, though, you're the kind of person who buys a machine based on the theoretical maximum print resolution, microscopic edge fidelity, and you feel the emotional trauma of not having C5 grade hardware, you're gonna hate this, loudly, on the internet. I think for everyone else, look, this is a good printer at a fair price with some meaningful quality of life features that genuinely can improve day-to-day use. It's not perfection, please ignore the hype. This is little more than a capable machine that genuinely improved day-to-day use. Although if you accidentally cure resin on that wavy screen, good luck getting it off. This is little more than a capable modern machine for the user who actually intends to print with it. And that's okay. So if that's what you want and you're happy to accept the limits it imposes, then yeah, definitely pick this one up. Because if the M3 Premium was the best thing they've ever built, the P1 is the closest they've come since, even if it's mostly playing dress up. If this video was helpful to you, at least open your eyes on what you're buying here, then please, as always, consider using my affiliate links and discount codes when I have them in the video description. I'll get a commission on the sale, that won't cost you more, but it is how I fund this channel. If you enjoyed what you saw, hit subscribe, hit like, hit the new hype button, whatever that does, tell your friends, and even consider joining us to get your name in the credits like these wonderful people who are on screen now. They do legitimately help to keep the lights on, so for this reward, along with Discord roles and early access, please consider signing up. I want to say thanks again to you for watching, and until next time, I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you. Fohammer out.